Welcome, everybody, to the second episode of B Grade Reading Level. I'm your host, Brendan, and this episode's going to be a little different than most of them. This is just an idea that kind of came to me on the fly. I thought, why not talk about my favorite biography books, or at least books about, specific person or group of people. And I haven't read a lot of them, to be fair. The fact that I have five of them that are going to be mentioned, I have not read that many more than these five, but I really enjoyed all five of these books, and I'm not going to go into full detail on them. I'm not going to spend too much time on each one. I'm just going to kind of, gloss over them, and you take from it what you will. Hopefully, they create enough interest that maybe you check one or two of them out. First one I have is Elvis Presley: A Life, written by Bobby Ann Mason. Now, this book I read years ago. This I actually wound up doing. I'm not sure if it was junior high school or high school, but for one reading assignment, whether it was summer reading or just an assignment throughout the year, I had to read a biography. And I remember my parents took me to Barnes and Noble. I had no idea who I wanted to read or anything like that. And luckily, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that said Elvis Presley. Now, as a kid, I loved Elvis. Thanks to Lilo and Stitch, that introduced me to Elvis Presley and all of his stuff, and I went nuts on him as a kid. I dressed as Elvis for Halloween and everything one year, so I was like, this is perfect. And, you know, just learning about the guy was so cool. Like, I never really knew anything about him. I never bothered to do any research on the guy other than, like, hey, it's Elvis. He was in Lilo and Stitch. He's in like Hawaiian movies or whatever. He's the king of rock and roll. So to actually learn about him and to see what, his upbringing was, how he, got into music, how he became like the rock and roll star, all the tragedy that he dealt with in his life, just how he basically worked himself to death and was forced to work himself to death by his manager and all the the drugs and everything. It's just interesting. For me, him being one of my favorite, musical artists of all time, it was just cool to learn about him. So that's the first book on my list. Second book on my list is by Brian Kilmeade and Don Yeager, George Washington's Secret Six, The Spy Ring That Saved the American Revolution. This one I read a few years ago. I was out of college. I had just started working. And this was in my grandfather's house. And I asked him if I could borrow it. I just needed, I needed a book to read on the bus ride to and from work. And it was really interesting. Like, I know there's been different shows about the same concept of, how George Washington created like a secret spy ring to, you know, help win the American Revolution. And, I was just curious. I wanted to learn a little bit more about Washington. I always thought, revolutionary stuff was pretty cool. Movies like The Patriot and different movies and shows similar to that. Just thought it would be cool. And I really enjoyed it. Now, these two authors, they've written a couple of other books together on Andrew Jackson, Thomas Jefferson, and I believe one other uh, U.S. figure. I haven't gotten to those yet. I own a couple of them. I just haven't started them yet. But George Washington's Secret Six. If you're looking for a historical book while also, a bio in a way, more not so much on Washington, but on the whole, spy ring, great read. Book number three I have here, surprisingly, maybe my favorite out of these five, is I Can't Make This Up: Life Lessons by Kevin Hart. Again, as I mentioned in my previous review, how you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. The cover for this is Kevin Hart making a stupid Kevin Hart face with a bunch of adorable little puppies on it, and that was enough for me to be like, oh, okay. Picked it up, read the back cover, and I had seen different videos and stuff of Kevin Hart talking about his upbringing. He mentions it a lot in his stand-ups. I've watched most of his stuff. I've always enjoyed him. He's pretty funny. But it was an interesting read. He did not have an easy upbringing. His mother was very hard on him because his older brother went through a lot of stuff. His dad was not, what you would call a model citizen father. So just to see how he went from, He literally shouldn't have become anything to becoming one of the most recognizable faces in this country, at least in, pop culture. I thought it was cool. And I'm usually not a fast reader. I struggle reading. Sometimes it takes me weeks and weeks. Sometimes I put a book off for months and then come back to this. This one I read in like 3 days, maybe two. I just flew right through it, and I don't know why. But I really enjoyed it, and if you get a chance, you should pick it up. Next on the list is an American original, Walt Disney by Bob Thomas. Now, I've always been a big fan of, all things Disney, all their media, obviously all the original films, get the idea, Mickey Mouse, all that stuff. And I knew a little bit about, like, how Walt Disney created the company with his brother and this and that. But for some reason, at some point in time, this was probably not long after I went to Disney World. Within the last like 10 months, I was there. And I guess having not been to Disney World in Florida in almost 20 years, you know, there is something about that place. It's so cool. It's so interesting. And I've been to Disneyland in California somehow more times than the one that's right down the coast of Florida. I guess I just wanted to learn more about how he like went from just Mickey Mouse to, you know, the name Disney is everywhere now. They've literally bought everything up. So it's just a cool read, to learn about, how he was able to make ends meet with like very little money when he was working on those original cartoons and stuff. How that company literally went from like the equivalent of like, working from paycheck to paycheck. Like he had to not pay his workers at certain points. But, those that stayed obviously, got the benefit of it in the end as they went down in history with one of the greatest, animators and pop culture icons of all time. So if you ever want to hear more about, the life of Disney, that would be the book for you. And then the last one on this list is The Mamba Mentality, How I Play by Kobe Bryant. Now, I got this book and read it before he passed away earlier this year. And I really liked it. It's not like, it's a coffee table size book. It's not really written like a bio. It's just each page will have like a different picture on it, and there might just be like one paragraph or two paragraphs on the page, just him talking about how did I overcome injuries, how did I overcome stress, how did I overcome a bad game, how did I handle this, how did I handle that, just to hear how he, for anyone that knows, Kobe Bryant, the Black Mamba, how he got the Mamba mentality, how for 20 years he was able to play the game of basketball at such a high level that even like toward the end of his career, him having a bad game in those last couple of seasons was really like still good numbers for the average NBA player. And obviously we all know he had that last game where he had 60 points, which was just awesome. And he's one of the greatest of all time. He's always been one of my favorites. What happened was horrible this year. So, you know, not to buy it because of what happened this year, but if you want to learn more about him, especially, with him recently passing. I know there is a couple of books lined up in the next year or so, a couple of bios on him, but if you want a book written from him directly, that would be the one. And that's about it. Like I said, I didn't want to go too crazy on these. If you want to look them up, I definitely recommend doing so. They're all interesting reads, just to learn more about those specific people, all, iconic people in their own right. And that's going to be it for now. Moving forward, they're mainly just going to be individual books. For some reason, I just kind of wanted to go over these a little bit quickly for a change. And thanks for listening, and take care.